ARE Podcast, Season 1, Episode 1.
Welcome to the ARE Podcast. ARE Podcast, where it's all about encouraging and inspiring you today so you can fulfill your dream of becoming a licensed architect tomorrow. And now your host, David Doucette.
Hello. Welcome back to the ARE Podcast. It's been a while since we have been on the air. Our previous 29 episodes are available on iTunes and on the website. What we are going to do now that we are back is we are going to start with Season 1. The previous 29 episodes, we could call them Season 0 for lack of something better to call them. But we're going to move through the seasons here. So this will be Season 1. Each season might have 12 or 13 episodes. That's to be determined. And we'd like to have each season be a theme, and that is to be determined as well. But since we are back now, this would be Season 1, Episode 1. And this is the top 5 for 5. And let's go ahead, get it started. And join for my faithful and loyal co-host, Eric Corey Freed. How are you, Eric?
I'm great. Very excited.
Have you moved again since the last time we talked? Or are you still staying put in Oregon now?
No, smart Alec. I'm still in Portland, Oregon. Same place.
So here we are, coming to you today with 5 for 5, the top 5 fears about ARE 5.0. And a lot of great topics. Each one is unique, and my guess is each one you will find some way to relate to it, because the way these have come about is we've started recently, Eric Talking with Candidates, where we offer a free 15-minute phone call that you can book from the website. And Eric is available during the week. And as of right now, as this recording, the schedule sets or resets on Saturday to book the following week. So he has 12 spots open. So he's been talking to a lot of you and finding out what your fears are and what is tripping you up. And that's what we have today. So some good stuff. I guess we'll do one by one. The first one here on our top 5 or top 5 for 5 is exam items. So Eric, what does that mean, exam items?
So first of all, with the switch to ARE 5.0, they're not called questions anymore. They're not called problems anymore. NCARB calls them items. And you could argue, that's semantics, really, but it's not, because in truth, a lot of these items require thinking and time. They're not the old-fashioned multiple choice questions anymore. They usually require more thinking, more thought, and in this case, more time. So candidates, I've spoken to now 50 candidates in the last month. And, many times they'll call they're still on 4.0 and they have a specific question about a vignette or something like that. But for all the ones that are facing 5.0, this was the number one fear of, we don't know what these things are. We don't know what these questions are. We don't really even understand what they look like. And so when we went out to NCARB in DC, and they gave me that 3-day tour of the 5.0 exam, one thing that I really discovered is, first of all, they're all architects. They're all licensed architects, which is nice. Secondly, they rewrote all of these old questions from 4.0 were all recreated and rewritten with this new learning format in mind. And so the best example I have, and what I've been telling candidates on the phone, is under 4.0, they might ask you a question like, what is a vapor barrier? And you would have a multiple choice list of options. And if you were a good test taker, you could probably rule out one or two of those multiple choice answers, and then you'd only have to pick between two more. But I don't know if it necessarily tested you on the knowledge. Now under 5.0, instead of asking you what is a vapor barrier, a question might be something like, here's a wall section for a building in hot, humid Atlanta. Drag the vapor barrier to the correct location in the wall section. So not only do you need to know what a vapor barrier is, but the fact that you would put it on the warm side of the insulation. And so this is their fear. But to me, it's also much more exciting. I think those of you listening, I think you'll enjoy, if you can think about enjoying the exam, I think you'll enjoy this exam more. And I really think it tests you on your knowledge.
Well, a couple of points there. First off, since last time we actually had a podcast, we were still in 4.0. So I guess I should back up a little bit now. We are in 5.0. Candidates who have received their authorization to test, I believe, by November 1st of 2016 of last year, can still take 4.0 until you actually transition to 5.0. But if you don't have your authorization to test by then you are taking 5.0. And you can confirm all this with NCARB. I'm just letting you know the overview of what I hear. In 5.0, the highlights, there are no vignettes. Those have gone away. And I think we're all probably happy about that. But as we've talked about before in blog posts and podcasts, before actually 5.0 was launched, what we knew of 5.0, it is much more aligned with how we practice both as young architects and as older architects actually in the office, in the field, on a day-to-day basis. And NCARB has tried to align the test more with the practice of architecture. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's a perfect example. So I really left with those 3 days in DC. I really left there with a newfound appreciation for the job that NCARB has to do, the daunting task of recreating a whole exam. And they even got into psychological learning modes and learning models of how you can test for applied knowledge. And there's a whole science behind it. So you will definitely see a quantum shift if you've taken any of 4.0, between 4.0 and 5.0 in the questions and how they're worded.
And that is something, as a side note, that you and I will be working on in the near future to our own exam simulator. Those are their own sort of design projects, and that's something that we will continually be updating, making it more aligned with 5.0, because, as you mentioned, with these exam items, it's much more about critical thinking than it is memorizing. You still have to know the information, but you really have to understand it so you can now apply it rather than, recall from rote memorization.
Right, which I think that's the good news. I really think this test, the 5.0, really mimics what you do on a daily basis. The joke that I've been telling everybody on the phone is it's going to feel like you're at work but not getting paid for it. And I think I think if anything that'll make you more comfortable. But then they had these other fears which we should probably get into.
Yeah, so number one is the exam items, and before we move to number two, I'll just say, I think 4.0, which is still out there, and some of you are still taking 4.0, I think we can all agree the vignettes themselves did not really have a lot to do with relating to what we do at work. I mean, there was, site zoning things and setbacks and all of that, which obviously related. But the actual solving the actual vignette problem was sort of just out somewhere off in the blue. It didn't necessarily relate to what we do now. Now that's been eliminated, and again, this 5.0 effort by NCARB to relate the exam more closely to how we practice. I think what I'm getting at is I think that this it makes it more, I think, real for the candidate, and hopefully makes it more interesting and more fun, because this kind of stuff we're learning, it's not just for the test now. Like, there was tips and tricks that you have to learn just for the test for the vignettes, okay? But now you're learning not only for the test, you're learning to grow as a young architect, as an intern architect. This is all knowledge you're going to need over the years. So hopefully it does become more interesting, more fun. Okay, number 2, new types of questions. We kind of have just been hitting on that a little bit, but so fear number 1 is the exam items. Fear number 2 is the new types of questions. Is this have to do with candidates not knowing what to expect?
Yes. So, although nobody seems to be missing the vignettes, everybody seems very happy about them going away. You have to admit, the nice thing about the vignettes is we had them for 20 years. So we knew them inside and out. We knew what to expect. And more importantly, we knew the constraints of the vignettes. I could say with confidence, in fact, we covered this in our own vignette review guides, but we could say with confidence, you can go within 10%. So if it asks you for a 300 square foot room, you could go down to 270 or up to 330 square feet and you wouldn't lose any points. We knew those constraints. We knew how off you could be with each individual thing. And as you just said, I think what it did was it created a system in which we had to teach them how to get good at taking the vignettes rather than teaching them about the knowledge. But now those vignettes have been replaced with 5 new types of problems here, items, remember. Drag in place, hotspots, quantitative fill-in-the-blank questions, check all the apply questions, and then the old school multiple choice, but even those have been rewritten. In addition, a lot of these new items are related to a larger case study that you get at the end of the exam, and typically the last 20 questions go to this case study.
And what I like about these new types of questions, as we were just talking about, it relates it more to how we practice. But candidates, and it sounds like you're hearing this on the phone, they get worried about the types of questions they're going to get, and they kind of want to know, well, are they going to ask this, or how are they going to ask this? It's a similar situation I find with the California Supplemental exam. For those of you who are blessed to live in California, it's not enough. Once you pass the 6 or 7 AREs, you have to now take California's own special exam to become licensed here. But what I find in doing that, they transition from oral to a multiple choice format. And people would be like, well, just what do I need to know for the exam? And that's a harder exam than any of the ARE, but I think 5.0 is almost more aligned in it, in the sense that, and this is what I tell candidates for the CSE, it doesn't matter if they're testing you orally, multiple choice, vignettes, doesn't matter how they're testing you, you have to know the information. It's not just about knowing it enough just to get by on the exam. You really have to understand it, because as we're seeing with 5.0, there's much more critical thinking involved. So you have to have an understanding of the knowledge and then be able to apply it on exam day with whatever is faced in front of you. You have to think about it like, how does this work? Or, it's not just it's not recalling for memorization.
Right. And that seems to be the biggest, the real fear that they have, or the biggest shift that they need to make, is that obviously, in many ways, the content is the same. You're going to talk about cantilevers and cambered beams and all that other stuff. You're going to talk about ducts and vents and supplies and plenums, but you now have to apply the information in the exam. So I think their biggest fear is not really that these exam type questions are new. I think really their fear is, listen, we can give you the content that you need to study, but it's your brain on the line in that exam, and you need to be able to apply that knowledge in a very new way. I think that's really where the fear is coming from. You know what it is? It's the training wheels are off. Yeah.
I mean, that's what it is. It's we now as candidates have to really think on our feet, on exam day. And I think that's a good thing. This shouldn't be an easy exam to pass. I've been giving them a sample question. This is one of the questions that we have in our online exam simulator, and it's one of my favorites. But I've asked
of the 50 calls I had this month, I've probably asked 30 of the people this question, and only 3 have gotten it right. So I think it's worth saying here. And I, of course, know David knows the answer to this. But
are you going to tell us, or are you just going to keep us waiting with bated breath?
Well, I'm building gravitas and suspense. But essentially, a contractor installs toilets as specified in the contract documents. Building inspector comes to inspect the job site and discovers those toilets do not meet building code. Who is responsible for replacing the toilets?
Do 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 do.
And so I've asked this now of at least 30 of them, and as I said, only 3 have gotten it right. So most people say, well, the contractor, and that's wrong. The contractor did their job. They installed the toilets as specified on the contract documents. They are not responsible for checking to see if the contract documents are in conformance with the local building code. That is the architect's job. Some people have said, well, it's the owner, it's their building. Wrong. The owner entrusted the contractor and the architect to certain responsibilities and duties, and the architect failed to fulfill those duties. So the correct answer is C, architect, because the architect was technically negligent in not checking to make sure that the toilets were in fact compliant with the local building code, and the architect might even have to file a claim with their insurance company to help them pay for it.
And I think the bigger issue here, and this is a great example, is understanding the concept behind it. Because let's say once you understand 5 concepts, you can, let's say, answer 75 questions if you understand the concept behind it. In this one that you just illustrated, you touched on the 2 main points. And let's say we're talking during construction, because that's what they are. That's where we are right now. The contractor's main job during construction is just to build per the contract documents. That's it. That's their main job. There's a lot of stuff they do, but that's all they're required to do. Now, if they notice something that is non-code compliant, then there's provisions in the contract, the general conditions where they notify us and the owner. But it's not their job to be looking for that. Their job is just to design per the contract documents. We are the ones, as you mentioned, Eric, that are in charge of designing per code. And if we understand that concept, then there could be a whole host of questions similar to this toilet issue that we could face on the exam that we could analyze and think about correctly if we understand the concept behind it.
Exactly. So it's a great question, and what I love about it is it sounds very simple. It's 3 sentences, but you really have to be able to understand the issue and then apply it.
Exactly. Okay, so that's number 2, new types of questions. Number 3, time. What is the issue we have with? We all fear running out of time, right? I think that was a fear in 4.0 and 3.0, and when it was 3 or 4 days or twice a year. So time's always going to be an issue, but what's the issue here?
Well, namely that we're going from 7 exams with vignettes to 6 with new types of items. They're not vignettes, but they're these new items. So time is of the essence here. I think if you finished for a 4.0 exam and had time left over, I think you will find that you will be racing against the clock in 5.0 exams so far. The appointments are longer, as you've no doubt noticed, right? But the items take more time than simple multiple choice.
And that goes back to what we've just been talking about. The 5.0 is more critical thinking. It's I'm sure there's some of the easier gimme, what I call gimme multiple choice questions and answers, but there's also going to be those more complicated, thought-provoking questions where you have to, take a moment to think about it. But now I assume, because NCARB obviously has tested this, that if we are prepared, we should be able to get through, all the questions or all the items on whichever division we're taking.
Well, yes, in theory. That's correct. And initially, for example, in our study guides at the very front, we show, okay, this is PPD. There's 95 items on the exam. The actual testing time is 4 hours and 15 minutes or 195 minutes. So therefore, you have 2 minutes and 9 seconds per item is what we initially had in the exam. We've since changed that because of these case study questions or items, I should say, at the end. You really need to leave more time. So when you arrive at those last case study items at the end, and you'll probably get 2 case studies. I mean, who can tell? But you'll probably get at least 2 case studies, meaning that they'll show you plans and elevations and sections and ask you a series of questions about that set of drawings. You should have at least 90 to 100 minutes left, so that way you can devote a full 5 minutes per item for these case study questions, because they do take more time. So now that means that, okay, if you're devoting that much time to the case study questions, you might only have 1 minute per item for the other things. And a lot of candidates have reported that was very helpful to know going in. A lot of people like to go in knowing I've only got 60 seconds to spend on this one, and then I have to move on. So that way they don't run out of time. So time management has always been an issue on all the AREs, dating back to the prehistoric caveman days, I guess, when we first did it, ARE 1.0. But now I think with these new types of problems, and because it's also unknown, managing your time is even more important.
And we're going to save our last item. We'll talk more about sort of NCARB and what we think NCARB's intent is here in the last item. But in this one, I just want to mention, obviously, NCARB is collecting stats on all of this as candidates are taking it. It's a new exam. It's a few months old. So it's a bit of a fluid thing, I think. So, it's all, it's new for them as well. They've done the best they can based on whatever testing they did to think, okay, this is what we should have. But they've been, I think, very transparent in the process in terms of the campaigns that they've been having for early test takers and free retaking and all of that stuff. Okay.
Yeah, so the NCARB guys that showed me last year, they were able to produce analytics for every single item, every single question. So they know how many times that item has been administered to a candidate. They know how many times that the candidate has gotten it right or wrong, and they're able to do that at the per item level. So that means if there's an item that 95% of candidates are getting wrong, it gets flagged, and they know that, and then they either rewrite it or pull it or replace it or something like that. So they're able to get a level of granularity that's really kind of amazing. What they're not able to do is customize the test to you, right? They don't know you as a candidate. They don't know your level of experience. They technically, I guess they know what order you took the exam in, but they're not changing the test based on, oh, she already took PDD, so therefore I'm only going to ask. They're not doing any of that. It's not an artificial intelligence computer here that's serving up a customized exam. It's, I think they've got 4 banks of questions, and they're randomly delivering questions from one of those banks. So that's really it. So kind of keep that in mind. When you're going through it for time.
Okay, number 4, overlapping information. What is the fear there?
Well, the candidates they're looking at the ARE 5.0 test specification. They're seeing that something like building codes is mentioned in multiple exams, and they're freaking out because they're asking me, does that mean I need to study building codes for every exam? And the answer is, well, yes and no. So, for example, in PPD, and in PDD, both cover mechanical systems, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, structural systems. But remember, the whole format of the exam has changed. Instead of being built on topics, under 4.0, it was done on topics like site planning, right? Structural systems. Now it's built on the phases of practice. So PPD, PA, programming and analysis, is the programming phase. PPD is the schematic design phase. PDD is design development into construction documents phases. So think about how you think about something like mechanical systems in the programming phase, and how different that is than how you think about mechanical systems in schematic design or when you're in construction documents. One of the great anecdotes that they gave us was think of the exams in terms of scale. So in programming and analysis, you're probably at 16th inch scale, right? You're drawing at that very high level scale. In schematic design or PPD, you're at eighth inch or quarter inch scale. And in PDD, in construction documents, you're at maybe half inch scale, maybe 1 inch scale, maybe even 3 inch equals 1 inch scale, right? You might, or full size or something crazy. So that idea of scale helps you set the context for what you're being asked. So you will be asked about mechanical systems in maybe all three of those exams: programming analysis, PPD, and PDD. But knowing that context of what scale you're in will change your answer. And so in our study guides, for example, we deliberately have repeating, overlapping information. By design, there's about 20% of all the information overlaps across all 6 exams. But between something like PPD and PDD especially, we probably have about 30% of that information is overlapping. Part of the reason for that is David and I have no idea what order you're taking the test in, right? That's number one. So if you're taking PDD first, you need that information now. If you're taking PPD first, you still need that information. So we're giving you both information at once. That's number one. So don't get mad at us and say, hey, it's the same information. And number two, at the end of each section, in our study guides, for example, we explain the context of this. Okay, if that was mechanical systems and that's how mechanical systems work, here's how it relates to schematic design phase. Here's how it relates to construction document phase. And so that way you can apply it to the correct phase. So although a lot of the content is repeated, at the end there are these detailed summaries of what are the implications for the phase that you're in. And you need to kind of keep that context in mind throughout the entire exam.
Well, and you also have to know the information. And sometimes it takes, seeing it 3, 4, 5 times, whatever it is. And as we mentioned earlier, this is not information we're just learning just to take the exam. This is stuff we're going to continue to use throughout our careers. And we don't know exactly what NCARB is going to ask on the exam. And frankly, I don't want to know. And we don't need to know. They give us their handbook. They give us the outline. That should be enough. And that's what we've used to do our guides. That should be enough to develop the study guides that we developed, get an understanding of the content. And that's what we're asking. I think that's what NCARB is asking for the candidates, to have a general understanding of the content. They're not asking anyone to be rocket scientists here. They're not asking anyone to delve into the minutia, I think, of any one particular topic. But they are asking us to have a command, of the general knowledge. And as you mentioned, Eric, whether it's building code at the programming phase or at the design development phase or at the contract documents phase, how that applies to that particular phase, or in this case, division, which I think is one of the things I really like about 5.0. It is much more phase-based than topic-based. So to your point, we're going to be learning about building codes in a couple of different divisions, and that's okay, because we have to know that stuff as practicing architects anyway. And if anyone is put off by that at NCARB or at us, thinking that they're repeating information, your head's in the wrong spot, number one. Number two, if it is repeating across, say, NCARB's outlines, building code, zoning code, whatever that kind of stuff is, then it's probably important stuff. And it's probably stuff that we use on a almost daily basis as practicing architects. So NCARB didn't, just create this haphazardly. If content is repeating across their study guides, then it's probably the more important content that we need to know as practicing architects.
Right. I think about something as simple as the concept of a plumbing wall. In the programming phase, you probably wouldn't even think about it, other than maybe stacking, the male and female bathrooms back to back. In something like PPD, schematic design, you might add a little bit of a dimension to it. That wall becomes thicker, right? In your 1/8-inch drawings. But in PDD, in the CD phase, that wall has a dimension to it. You know what the wall is built out of. The issues of a wall-hanging toilet versus a floor-mounted toilet. In all three cases, we're talking about a plumbing wall here. But in all three cases, you're thinking about it in a very different way. So that context is the best advice I think that we can give you in helping you through the exam, right? As you're sitting there, they're asking you the question. Okay, they're asking me this question, but wait a minute. Which exam am I in? What phase am I in? What information am I summoning? This is what you do at work every day, right? If you're in the early schematic design phases with a client and you're having conversations around plumbing walls, you're thinking about it in a very different way than you would later in the CD phase when you're submitting for building permit.
It's interesting you mentioned that. I think your plumbing wall is a perfect example because it took me probably a few years to figure this one out. In the residential world and the venting for the toilet, and we just draw on CAD whatever our 5-inch wall in schematic design. And as you know, in residential, space can get tight, especially if you're trying to fit in a second bathroom crammed up next to a secondary bedroom. And I don't know how many times we do the drawings and you get in the field and it doesn't fit because you got to put the damn vent stack for the toilet. It doesn't fit in a regular 2x4 wall. You got to fur something out, and now your 5-foot wide bathroom just got a little smaller and everything is cramped. It finally took me a while to figure out, well, let's just make that toilet wall in whatever schematic design drawing we do. Just draw the damn thing at 6 inches, and we'll just, we'll do it from there. So then we can accommodate it.
Yeah, because if your 5-foot wide bathroom becomes 4'10", then suddenly your tiles are messed up too, right? All your beautiful tile patterns and interior elevations that you drew are now messed up too.
Oh yeah, it sounds like nothing. I mean, it sounds like an inch or two, but when space is a premium, and especially us as architects, an inch or two, that means a lot. That can affect a lot of things. So
I had a computer programmer client in San Francisco. I mean, there's a lot of them there. His name is also Dave, but he said, I don't want any tiles to be cut. And I thought he was joking. I'm like, yeah, sure. He's like, no, I'm serious. I can't have any cut tiles in my shower. And so we had to do full scale drawings of the tile layout, measuring the physical tiles, not just the nominal, it's a 12 by 12 tile, but I had to get samples and measure them. It's actually 11 and 7/8, and then get precise on the grout thicknesses, and then work with the tile subcontractor to make sure that there were no cut tiles. And it looked great at the end, but it was nuts.
That's totally nuts. And then you got to float it the right depth on the opposite walls, right? So
right.
That's crazy. My response would have been, I'm too busy to work with you.
Well, I was charging him hourly, so I said, okay, if you want to spend that time, let's do it.
Right. How many mock-ups do you need me to do? All right, so that we have 4 of the 5. So number 1, exam items. Number 2, new types of questions. Number 3, time. Number 4, overlapping information. And then number 5, which is probably the most poignant and probably, well, I don't know if you rank these as important. They're all sort of important, but trick questions. Where candidates might go into this thinking NCARB is trying to trick us, NCARB is out to get us, NCARB hates us. NCARB doesn't want us to become licensed. NCARB just wants to take our money, and they just want us to keep paying to retake these exams. We're talking about an attitude, number one there. But what is it that you're hearing about trick questions?
Well, I think this is one of those old urban legends that forever candidates have been saying to us, both of us in their emails and stuff, that, they because they don't know the answer, they just assume that the question is a trick question. And so I getting to spend 3 days with the NCARB folks, you get to talk about everything. I got to say to them, everybody hates the rolling clock. Did you know that? And they're like, no, I think people like it. And I said, no, everybody hates it. There's a certain familiarity that we got to get with them, which was nice. But, one of the other things I had said to them was, candidates are convinced that there are trick questions. And so Jared Zern, who's the director of this whole thing, he had a great answer. And so I just want to share it with you because it made me feel better about the exam. And I think it'll make you feel better. And I'm paraphrasing it, of course, because we were talking. But he said, we're writing these questions for everybody. We have to write them in a very general way. So we create the questions as textbook examples. And the answer we're looking for is a textbook answer. So if they're asking you about contracts, right? If you're in the construction and valuation division and you're getting questions about contracts. Remember, they're asking you, what is the general? How was the contract designed? What was the intent of the way the contract was written? That's what the question is asking you, and that's the answer they're looking for. The trouble is candidates overthink it. Candidates will go through and they'll say, well, gosh, one time I saw my boss do this, and another time I saw a contractor do this. And they start getting wrapped up in the semantics of the wording. And because they think that the questions are trying to trick them, they try to outsmart the question. And in doing so, they get it wrong.
Well, I want to stop you actually right there, because that is probably the most important thing you said in the last half hour. Outsmarting the question. I love that. Like, don't outsmart the question. Just take it for what it is. But you're absolutely right. And I think we're probably all guilty of that at some point, taking these tests. We're trying to be more clever than what's in front of us. We're trying to outsmart the question and making ourselves mad in the process.
I think the smarter, because we've dealt with thousands of candidates over the years, and just in this last month of having these phone calls, which have been really a lot of fun with these 50 so far, what I've discovered is the smarter you are, the harder time you're going to have with the exam, basically, because you're trying to outsmart the exam. You're trying to be too clever. You're overthinking it. Stop overthinking it. They don't know you, right? The people that wrote the questions don't know you. They don't know your experience. They don't know your background. They have to write this question to a general audience by design, and they're asking you the textbook way to do it. And the trouble is that you start thinking, well, we never did applications for payment like that. Yeah, because you were doing them wrong. That's why. You were not doing them to the letter of the law. They don't know you. They're not mind readers. So they're asking you questions. What is the intent of the owner-architect agreement? What is the intent of the owner-contractor agreement? They're testing you on the knowledge. And so they want a textbook answer back. So you should be able to anticipate the answer they're looking for, knowing that now, knowing that they're not trying to trick you, and instead they're really just trying to test you on knowledge.
They are, and to your point, someone could say, well, it's not a test about reality. I know people would say that about the CSE. It is a test about reality, both the CSE and I think ARE 5.0. However, like you just mentioned, it's a test about sort of doing it the right way and trying to figure out what the right way is in terms of especially construction and the construction evaluation, the A201, the general conditions. A lot of that stuff, it's right in the general conditions somewhere. Applications for payment lays out exactly how the contractor gets paid. Non-conforming work lays out exactly what happens. And that is the kind of stuff they're looking for. I know I've mentioned this before in probably various podcasts, but when I was doing the CSE oral, when that was administered orally, somebody took the exam, failed, then came to my seminar. They said they've been doing contract administration for 15 years, and that is the section that they failed in the exam. And the reason is because they've been doing it for 15 years, and they took whatever they learned in the field and just applied it to the exam without learning it the right way, meaning the A201. You just do it the way the general conditions tell you to do it.
Well, you were teasing me the other day. We were talking, I forget what we were talking about, but I was saying how I love doing punch lists, and I love going through and doing punch lists. And you said, yeah, it's the contractor's responsibility to do the punch list.
Right.
And I said, oh, really? Because I've just been doing them.
We all been doing them.
Yeah, I've been doing them wrong. I mean, the textbook answer according to the contract and the agreement is it's the contractor's responsibility. It's kind of funny. It's kind of funny you mentioned that. That's why I said I think the smarter you are, the more experience you have, the harder time you're going to have with the exam.
Yeah, that could be. That could be for sure. Overthinking it, and I think as architects, generally, we're probably overthinkers. And what I tell CSE candidates is just read the question in front of you and don't add a bunch of other stuff. And I think that gets into trying to outsmart the question. Just take it at face value, what's in front of you. And like we started this number 5 topic, it's not a trick question. They're not trying to trick you. So just get out of that, get out of that mindset and just read what's in front of you, and the correct answer's in there somewhere.
Right. Yeah, exactly. When I lived in New York for a very brief time, I drove a taxi cab at night to try to make money because I was working as an architect during the day. So I drove a cab at night, which I hated, but that's a whole other story. But what I discovered is the longer the amount of time that these guys were cab drivers, the worse drivers they were.
Right.
I'd meet these people that were like, I've been driving a cab for 20 years, and they would be the worst driver ever because there's a certain, let's say, arrogance that comes with it, or overconfidence, we used to joke that, dude, if you had to take the driving test, you would fail. You would not be good at all, and they would get insulted by this. But I think it's true, and I think here at the area, the same thing. If you got 15 years doing construction administration and you learned a whole bunch of bad habits, you're going to have to let a lot of that experience go and learn the correct way to do things in order to pass something like construction evaluation.
And actually, you mentioned something about the guy driving 20 years. Arrogance. I think actually the better word would be complacent or complacency.
Yes.
Because you could be in the field for 20 years if you're doing things the way you're supposed to, i.e. the general conditions, the contract, the AIA contracts. Then you're probably up on it. You know what I mean? So it depends how much, I guess, self-knowledge or self-learning you're doing along the way. We get complacent, we get lazy when we think like, well, we know everything. I don't need to study. I don't need to keep my brain, fresh and polished. Then we get complacent and lazy. So I think that's the bigger danger there.
When I brought up this idea of trick questions to the NCARB folks, first of all, their faces looked like they were hurt. They looked hurt by this accusation. And what I really discovered is they genuinely want you to pass. They want everybody to pass. They really work hard at making it so you can pass. And the only way they can do that is if they test you on the knowledge. The whole purpose of rewriting 5.0 wasn't to make our lives more difficult, or in this case, make David and I work for a full year to create new guides. The whole reason they updated to 5.0 is because they knew so much more about testing and application of knowledge. And I think that's reflected in the new exam.
I think you're right. And I think, the CSE, the pass rate for first-time test takers is like 55%, 54%. So it's a difficult exam. And I appreciate the emails that I get from candidates who don't pass, and they say, yeah, I missed it by 2 points, because they at the CSC they give you your results right there at the test center, and they'll say, yeah, I missed it on 2 points. I'm going to take a couple months off, because you have to wait 6 months to take it again, and then they're going to jump back on the horse, or do you have any advice for me, or whatever it is. But you can tell in the tone of their email that they're staying positive. They're bummed, right? Because we failed and no one wants to fail. But I can tell just in that couple of paragraphs, they're going to be okay. They're going to get back on the horse, and they're going to study again, and they're going to pass. And it might take them 2 or 3 times. And I think what's important about that, it's a mindset. And nowhere in that email are they mad at CAB or think CAB is, out to get them, even though there's poorly worded questions on that particular exam. So it's a mind shift. And to your point, Eric, NCARB is not out to get anybody. They're real people. They're younger people. You spent 3 days with them last spring in Washington, and you came away that they enjoy doing. This is what they do. This is their job.
Oh yeah, they're hardcore testing nerds. They're real dorky about it.
All right. So number 1, exam items. Number 2, new types of questions. Number 3, time. Number 4, overlapping information. Number 5, trick questions. Well, it's been great to be back on the air. Because it's the only time I guess I get to talk to you.
Oh.
Right? We haven't talked since last June, since our last episode.
I talk to you 5 times a day, every day. I don't know what you're talking about.
All right, I think we've said enough for one day. On behalf of Eric Corey Freed, my name is David Doucette. This is the ARE podcast, and we will talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the ARE podcast. Be sure to visit architectexamprep.com and check out our other podcast episodes, video tips, and the ARE blog. Remember to plan,